we at Interpol, we've been doing drones for 5 years just because some Interpol member countries, like the United States and the UK, asked us to look at drones because they were starting to see contraband being delivered into prisons. So they wanted us to have a look and see whether other Interpol member countries were facing the same. And then I've been on a roller coaster of drones ever since. So hold on. So the general discussion is generally what is a good drone, what is a bad drone, and the answer is how can you tell? Because once a drone is up in the air and it's being flown by someone, how do you know that's a good or bad drone? And a lot of people in the discussions we have are saying, well, remote ID will solve this issue. Drone countermeasures will protect our airspace. And the truth of the matter is they may help, but if someone is determined to get a drone into your vicinity, into your stadium, into your electrical grid, they will succeed some way or somehow. So to make it easy for Interpol member countries, we put the drone problem into 3 distinct areas, which is the use of drones by law enforcement, which is the tool element. We look at the drone threat, which is obviously the threat from drones, but also the use of countermeasures. And then also, I'm also looking at drone forensics. How do you then investigate a drone once it has been involved in an incident, and what is the data that you can recover from such a drone? So during a European Union exercise, we analyzed over 800 drone threats over a period of 2 years. And we have lots of discussions about what the different types of threats that people face. So we made it very simple. We said you're either clueless, careless, compliant, you're either uninhibited, or you can be a criminal or terrorist. And there you can see most of the drone threats that we see being reported are uninhibited or just clueless or careless. There is a criminal element and there is a slight terrorist element, but most of it is just uninhibited people just wanting to get that $1 million shot of the airport or of a stadium or of a concert or of an area that they're currently in because they like to try and get a good picture of what's happening. So we then analyze what sort of targets are they using. So as you can see, private non-corporate prisons was very high, government military was very high, airports was also very high. And then we're also starting to see an increase of criminal gangs using drones to keep eyes on law enforcement activities. So if you are in US, we're seeing a huge rise of cartels using drones to monitor the border patrols around the borders to try and direct their smuggling operations away from the border patrols. And then what sort of thing would happen? Well, smuggling was very high, spying, espionage. To create terrorists, the civilian threat was fairly high, but most of it was just trespassing or a near miss. And so, as you can see, it's fairly even across the board over most of the issues and challenges that a drone may present to you, but we see this changing over time as drone technology gets better and the need for human intervention whilst the drone in the air is reduced. So there was some World Cup thing last year in Qatar where many countries went to Qatar and played soccer for a few weeks to try and win a trophy. And so we were asked by the Qatar authorities to test their response to a drone coming into the stadium 1 month before the event to see that their command and coordination was correct and to make sure that their personnel were ready for any drones coming in or near the stadiums. So we are seeing the threat at mass events increasing annually because it's a very easy target. And normally stadiums tend to be in open areas. So there's plenty of places to take off, plenty of places to hide, and plenty of places to take photographs of. And we're seeing disruptions to games in soccer, in the NFL, in baseball, and even in motor vehicle racing, such as Formula One. We do see drones becoming more and more popular as a method of attack. So why do we do this? Well, we actually run a drone expert summit every year. The next one will be in San Diego in end of October, where we're looking at the use of drones by law enforcement. But we try to host at least one international event a year on drones to help member countries get on top of the issue. So we created a red team for Qatar. So it was myself, 2 people from Project Stadia, and then we had 4 external experts from UK, Australia, Finland, and the US. And they basically were tasked with selecting the drones that we were going to use and coming up with the plans of how we would attack the stadium or get a drone into the stadium. And the thing about this exercise, it wasn't to succeed in doing this, it was more to develop confidence in the country's response to the drone coming in or near the stadium. Because if we're honest, if you are determined to get a drone into an installation, you will be able to do it. But the point of this exercise was not to do that. It was more to build confidence, have a look at the command and coordination of a drone coming into the airspace and seeing how that would work and seeing how quick the response would be and what that response would take. So we had to make sure we had all clearances and authorizations from the Civil Aviation Authority and from the governments. One of the stadiums was situated right next to the international airport in Doha. So it was less than 1 kilometer from the international airport, and we were very surprised that the Aviation Authority allowed us clearance to fly drones into the stadium, even while planes were landing and taking off and helicopters were moving around the airspace. And we actually flew a drone from 2.5 kilometers away into the stadium across the port, and we were able to get the drone interdicted by the response team, and we actually were able to return the drone back to home. And the point, as I said, with this exercise was not to be successful, it was to build confidence in the command and coordination and build confidence with the response teams as well as the security detail that were in charge of protecting the stadium.
Hey, Chris,
So,
real quick, do you have the like the dock of where we actually can't see your full screen? You have
oh,
a gray
really?
bar. Can you
Oh,
minimize our images in the waiting room so we can see your full screen?
sure.
Because
Hold on.
sometimes the text is cut off.
Oh, okay. Hold on a second. Let me see how I put you onto full screen. On my screen, you're on full screen at the moment, so I don't know why the grey bar's there.
Maybe that's the Zoom overlay.
Maybe. Well,
Okay.
oh, is that at the top? Is it the grey bar?
Yeah, I
Yeah,
carries right. I
that's
think
the
it's probably
zoom
the
over.
people on the right side. Yeah.
Okay.
Is the overlay. Yeah.
Okay.
So sorry about that.
Yeah, no, no.
I will share the presentation anyway, so you can share it
Perfect.
to
Okay,
everyone. So
cool,
don't worry
perfect.
about it.
Thanks.
So one of the first tasks we had to do was reconnaissance. So we basically scoped out three of the stadiums where we looked to identify potential takeoff locations. We even identified what systems they had in place to do detection of drones as well, so we could understand were there any areas where the detection system wasn't covering or potentially may not be covering. We identified potential flight paths and vectors, and we also identified certain response protocols that were already in place when we were at the stadiums to understand how they may respond as soon as they saw the drone. And we also planned different types of flight required to test them. So we did ones called pop-ups, one which were long range, some medium range, and some short range ones. And we identified these positions and assigned the pilots to those roles. One challenge we had was we had to use good drones, not bad drones. And I don't mean that they were good drones. I mean, what would happen is if they were neutralized, what would the drone do? Would it drop out the sky? Or would it return to home? Or would it go 200 feet higher to try and escape the signal, then try continue flying? Or would it return to home automatically? So we had to use drones that we knew would return to home because we could not afford to have a drone just drop out the sky, even though there was not a mass crowd there. We had to ensure that every drone that we neutralized would return to home, and this took a day or two of testing to make sure we used the right drones. So the objectives were to just test the CUAS operators to ensure that they reacted to drones coming into the vicinity. We also had to look at the detection and tracking and identification of drones coming in through the CUAS system. And then we also had to look at the command and coordination processes involved when a drone does enter the airspace, because when we first arrived, we had an overview of how they would operate, and we identified that it was very cumbersome for someone to indicate to eradicate a drone coming into the airspace due to the command and coordination required to get approvals to do that work. So we did have limitations. We had to only work on the official drone bands of 2.4 and 5.7. We couldn't go anywhere over that or under that. So that was a limitation. So that was just the off the market frequencies that most drones will utilize. We could only use safe drones. We had to use different attack vectors, and we had to be selected because of the clear parameters for testing. So each site was selected due to the size of the stadium and due to the likelihood that an attack may take place at the stadium. So an example was one stadium was in the middle of a university and next to a golf course, and they already had enough measures in place where if it was just a regular drone incursion, it could be handled very well. Whereas the stadium next to the airport, there was a lot of areas where you could launch a drone attack from, and even the main stadium where they held the World Cup final, there was huge areas of open land and raised areas where you could launch a drone attack. We were only allowed to fly up to around 250 meters in height. All pilots were to fly on 2.4, and all pilots had to have a clear path for return to home. So we couldn't fly in and around buildings because obviously if the drone returned to home, it may hit the building if we flew around the buildings. So that was some challenge for us, but we were still able to do this. So if you want some 10 red teaming scenarios for stadiums, there you go. There's 10 scenarios that we came up with, and we created the actor story, we created the reaction story, and this helped us work out which one we would do and how we would run it. So we had to ensure the user story was great. We had to use the value use of the drone was right, and we had to ensure the parameters exercised were met and we didn't go over or under the parameters. We had to ensure the scenario met what the one of those 10 scenarios that we just showed, and we had to ensure we knew if it was a success or a failure. So the problem is everyone is waiting for that black swan event, especially in Europe and America. Everyone's waiting for that black swan event somewhere to happen in Europe or America. But we are already seeing this happening in the Middle East and even in Asia, where they've already experienced black swan events. So the biggest black swan event I can remember is where Saudi Arabia had drones flown into their petroleum processing plant, and it reduced their capacity by 50%, and that increased the oil prices around the world over a week's period, and oil prices increased by 15%. So if that's not a black swan event, I'm not sure what is, but anyway. So we also have the problem, how do we stop a drone? Because most countries can detect, locate, track, and identify and classify, but they are not allowed to mitigate and defeat. Even in countries in the US, there's only selected agencies that are able to do mitigation and defeat, and that's only if it meets a set criteria. So it's a huge challenge for everyone, even to do detect, locate, track, and identify and classify, but to mitigate and defeat, that's a bit beyond many countries still at this moment in time. We did do a drone incursion in Norway. I'm not going to play the video, but we successfully installed 15 drone countermeasures at Norway International Airport, and we switched them on while airplanes still flew, and we tested the 15 drone countermeasures against set criteria. And if you want to find the report, just go on the internet, type Interpol drone countermeasures exercise report, and that's published on the internet, and that's freely available to everyone. So if you want to know how to protect your stadium, most people use the red, amber, green zones. So if a drone enters a zone which is 3 to 5 kilometers away from the stadium, you should maybe monitor it, but not be too worried. If it becomes between 1 to 3 kilometers, you need to start worrying about it. And then obviously if it gets to less than 1 kilometer, you need to start to worry about it and do something to try and stop it. So for example, in the member country we worked with, 3 to 5, they just took notice the drone was there. 1 to 3, they started to look at the drone more closely and understand how is it being flown, where is it being flown to, where has it come from, is this a threat or is this a good drone? And then less than the 1 kilometer, they would just bring the drone down by using signal jamming and frequency jamming, which was fine for where they were, but in many countries, even if it gets to less than 1 kilometer, you may have to still locate the pilot and speak nicely to the pilot to bring the drone down. So we did 3 types of drone tests. We did drone jack in the box, where we just flew drones up at random places in and around the stadium, where we lift the drone up to either 50 feet, 100 feet, or 200 feet, and we would see what the reaction was from the responding teams. We would do in the pipe testing, which is a military term, where we would do it 30 meters at 30 meters away, 100 meters at 100 meters away, and 200 meters at 200 meters away, just to see how they would react. And then one of the last exercises was, at one point we flew 9 drones into a stadium at the same time to see where they would deploy their men and how they would react. We didn't do in the pipe in the end because it was seemed not necessary, because when we did the pop-ups, we could see that they were very well conversed in how to react and how to respond. So there was no need to do the in the pipe test, but the Fast and Furious was required on the last day because they needed to handle many different drone threats at the same time. So by doing that, we were able to refine the rules of engagement. We were able to evolutionize their response, and we also refined the command and coordination of a drone coming into the stadium. So instead of the responder having to radio to command and control to ask permission to engage the drone and jam the drone to bring it down, they were able to make that decision themselves, and that saved at least 90 seconds to 2 minutes in response time. And it also gave confidence to the drone neutralizing team that they could operate independently as long as they kept the command and coordination center in control. And we can say this successfully worked because there was not many drone incidents at the Qatar World Cup, and we were able to get good feedback from the authorities, say we actually assisted because we were able to come with a different mindset to what they had been trained in before, and because we were external and we didn't really understand their processes in place at the time, we were able to think slightly differently to the people who were training them to do that work. So I work at Interpol. We work with many people to try and understand this drone problem. So we work with UAS Norway, the Norwegian police, the European Union, obviously with Kerry themselves. We work with the CPNI here in UK. We work with the NPCC. We work with CESA, the FAA, and we also advise some of these entities on what's emerging in member countries and how they need to try and build their legislation and response plans to evolutionize with the threats that they're seeing. We are just a part of the puzzle. We understand the situation, we understand the problems, but we are in no means experts. But we're able to call upon experts from the field of drones and countermeasures and critical infrastructure protection and so on and so forth to help you evolutionize what you're seeing and how you're going to see it. So I'll just quickly mention Project Courageous, which is a European project that we're currently working on. I'm due to go to Belgium next week to do testing of drone countermeasures in Belgium, where we're going to test a assessment, selection and testing criteria for countermeasures for law enforcement, because this is a European funded project where the EU have identified that where the law enforcement are having trouble selecting and testing the right countermeasures. So we've been asked to help. So we're doing it along with 18 other institutions, and it's going very well. We're going to go to Belgium next week for the second phase of testing, and there will be a third phase of testing in Spain in March next year. And this is a quick overview of what we did at the airport. So we evaluated and tested drone countermeasures in an airport that was live. This was Oslo International Airport, so this wasn't a small airport. This was the major airport of Oslo. So we tested passive active multi-system, and then we did live exercise of countermeasures where we actually jammed drones in the airport environment to see how that affected the airport systems and how they responded to such threats. But we kept it simple. So instead of saying we're going to protect the whole airport, we just protected a 2 kilometer by 2 kilometer square. And so when drone countermeasure companies were selected, we gave them parameters of the exercise, which we thought was very simple, because protecting a 2 kilometer by 2 kilometer square should be fairly straightforward. But actually it wasn't, because they weren't allowed to do any recce of the area before the event. And some of them were quite surprised around the fact that there were buildings in the area. There was trees with leaves on, which could cause problems to their systems. And there was also some other RF interference, which they weren't thinking about when they selected the appropriate equipment to be done. So we did over 100 drone flights. There were 2,000 aircraft movements while we did the tests. We tested 20 systems from 12 providers, and we had 120 participants from 16 countries. And this is the beauty of Interpol, is we bring many countries together to look at the same problem at the same time rather than doing it individually. And this is why we are here to present with the think tank today, because we really like what they're doing and we're very supportive of their work. It was a very complex task, but we just used off-the-shelf DJI drones. We didn't change any of the drones. We didn't add any new software updates. We didn't take any of the software that was installed by the manufacturer off. We just used them as they were out the box with any updates, and this did create problems for some of the systems. Our current steps are we published the drone incursion exercise testing report, which you can find on the internet. We're updating the framework for responding to a drone incident because we have to deliver some drone forensic training. And we are looking at the creation of the selection, testing, and assessment drone countermeasures for law enforcement through the EU-funded project. And this will become a standard of sorts within the European Union. So if any law enforcement entity in the European Union want to use countermeasures or want to buy countermeasures, they're going to have to go through the criteria that we set in this work. Again, if you want to see a drone countermeasure report, just type into Google or whatever search engine you use, Interpol drone countermeasure exercise report, and you will come across it, and you will come across how we assessed each drone countermeasure and how they scored, but we won't tell you which we tested. And then our aspirations are to develop a framework for the use of drones by law enforcement to help member countries use drones for good, because drones are bad, but they can also be good. We want to continue the development of drone forensics and CUAS. We also want to look at maybe developing a global reporting system for drone threats, so everyone has a central point, a bit like what Mike Monique's DroneSec does. But we want to enhance that a bit, and we want to collaborate with Frontex and other entities such as we think, to really bring the right people around the table to do these scenarios and do the testing, because only by doing actual in-life scenarios can you really understand the challenges that you face. Thank you very much. I hope I haven't gone over my time, and I hope everyone found that presentation useful. And obviously, if there's any questions, please ask during the expert panel that's coming up. Thank you very much, everyone.